I'm Overthink podcast co-host Ellie Anderson, and I'm here with my co-host David Peña-Guzmán. We are both philosophy professors, as you probably know if you listen to our podcast or watch our YouTube videos, and we get a lot of questions from folks about whether or not to apply to philosophy graduate school. So we thought we would canvas some of our ideas on that here in this video. David, if I'm a student coming to you and asking, should I go to graduate school in philosophy, what are you going to tell me?
So this is a question that we get quite frequently. I'll speak for myself. I suspect that the same is true for you in our capacity as professors. And the first thing that I always say whenever I get asked this is that it's a really difficult question. And it's a very difficult question to answer as a professor because you don't want to feel as if you are determining a student's possible choices or pushing them in a direction or another. And so what makes the decision to answer it very problematic for me is simply the material realities of the profession, the difficulties of the job market, and I think those are things that have to be factored into thinking about this.
Can you be specific on that?
Yeah, so we know, anybody in the profession can tell you that we have a lot more PhDs than there are positions. We also know that the traditional position that people hope to get at the end of their education, especially a doctoral program, that tenured track assistant professor position is becoming more and more rare in academia as we see the adjunctification of the professoriate. There are more short-term contract positions that don't have job security, that don't have tenure, and that don't pay a living wage. And so the thing that people think they will get at the end of this long trajectory of a PhD is becoming less and less attainable. And that's just a statistical issue. It has nothing to do with talent or with merit. And so that makes it very difficult to tell somebody, yes, you should invest 6, maybe 7 years of your life in something that at the end of that process might not actually pay off in this particular way.
Let's take a step back here because I think we need to be clear about what we mean by philosophy graduate school because you mentioned 6 or 7 years and some people might not really know what that looks like. There are 2 ways to apply to philosophy graduate school. You can apply as a master's student or you can apply as a PhD student. Even if you don't have a master's, and master's comes before PhD, if you apply to a PhD program, you will pick up a master's along the way. That is what both you and I did. So you need a college degree. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the U.S. context here because we're both living and working in America. You need a college degree. And then if you have a college degree, you can apply directly to a PhD program. Doing that is usually 5 years minimum of, grad school. 2 to 3 years of coursework, and then the rest of the time spent writing a dissertation. The nice thing about that is that PhD programs are generally funded, in part because you are a teaching assistant for a professor and sometimes teaching your own classes in addition to doing research. And so this means that you have tuition remission. You're not paying to go to graduate school, which is really important in U.S. context because universities are so extraordinarily expensive. And it also means that you have that kind of guarantee of a certain amount of time given to you. Graduate students usually receive a stipend at the PhD level, which may or may not be a living wage depending on where you go, but I think for us...
your living circumstances, if you have a family, if it's just you, etc.
But I think for us it was a living wage. It wasn't like a lot, and some people have side jobs. I definitely had a side job for a bit during grad school, but the idea of being able to go to a PhD program and not go into debt for it was essential for me in considering this. Now, it's different if you go into a master's program, whereas PhDs are usually 5 years minimum and can be a good deal longer depending on how long your dissertation takes you to write. I was 5 years. You were?
I was 5 years.
5 years?
No, 5? I think I was 5 years.
I think you were 5 years as well, too.
Yeah, I don't...
Yeah.
Yes. No, 6 years because I did a 1-year extension in New Orleans.
Okay.
Yes.
So 5 or 6 years. A lot of people will take maybe 7, 8. In philosophy, it's not that common to go beyond that because a lot of us aren't doing field research in other countries, which you might be doing in different disciplines. But the other option is a master's program, and master's programs in the US are generally 2 years. Mostly that involves coursework. So master's programs will usually be 2 years of coursework, and you'll write a master's thesis. Now, some master's programs are funded, but most are not. And so if you get into a master's program, you're generally looking at having to pay tuition to go. And that tuition is quite steep if it's at an American university.
Especially if it's out of state. Master's programs can be more affordable if you have in-state tuition and you go to a public school. So there they are much more reasonable, but still that distinction still holds that in general PhD programs are much more selective because more people apply to them, but they're funded. Master's programs in general are not funded, with a few exceptions of maybe more prestigious MA programs that happen to have backing from the university.
And so being able to find a funded MA program is a really cool thing to do. There might be other reasons for doing a non-funded MA program. For instance, a lot of people will do that if they don't get into any PhD programs right off the bat, because if you go to a strong MA program, you may have a better likelihood of getting into a PhD program afterward. Some people want to just do a terminal MA and spend 2 years rather than 5, 6 plus studying more philosophy, which is really cool. But you do need to be clear about what you're getting yourself into if you're sinking a lot of money into that.
Yeah, and you also have to be clear about what your goals are. So if you want to be a college professor specifically, like Ellie and I, you do need a PhD.
Yes.
That's sort of non-negotiable. But if your goal is to be, let's say, a K through 12 teacher, you can do that with a master's if you find a place that is looking for like a philosophy teacher.
But you can also usually do that without a master's.
True, but some people choose to do the master's because it brings you into a higher pay scale. You get paid in the K through 12 system depending on your level of education. So there are financial motivations for having a master's. Or you can also teach in the community college circuit with a master, with a master's. And so here you really have to think about what it is that you value about about a possible career in education. If you value pedagogy and you would be happy teaching, in the K through 12 system or in a private high school or in a community college, then a master's program would allow you to do that. If your goal is to be a researcher at a university, then that does require that additional step of multiple additional years and a dissertation.
So let's talk about what it's actually like to be in grad school in philosophy. We can speak from the PhD, getting a master's along the way perspective.
What do you mean by that?
Like, what does our day-to-day life look like?
Okay.
I mentioned that you usually have a couple of years of coursework. So we had 3 years of coursework. What did we take, like 3 seminars per semester?
Yeah, 3 seminars per semester for 6 semesters, so 3 years. And so during coursework, the idea is that you will beef up your expertise in the field. You will develop generalized knowledge about philosophy as a whole that you didn't quite develop as an undergrad because you don't go into as much depth when you're an undergrad. So in our case, we went to a program, Emory University, that had a specific emphasis in the history of philosophy. So we spent our time sort of moving through the canon, through the Western canon in particular. We read our Plato, our Kant, our Aristotle, so on and so forth. And the idea of coursework is twofold. One is to build up that base that makes you an expert. But the second one is that as you're moving through this very vast terrain, you will also develop your own personal interest, and you will identify a particular field or sub-branch of philosophy where you can specialize. And at the end of that coursework, you'll be ready to then write a dissertation that makes, you will be ready to embark on the process of writing a dissertation that makes a contribution to that specific field. So it's both buildup of knowledge and identifying what you really love about that.
And coursework is a really delightful part of graduate school, at least in my experience. I loved that period of reading a lot and generating knowledge in a huge range of areas within philosophy, of talking with other students. So this was where you and I first met, and you always had great things to say in the graduate seminar room. And, so often if you find a good graduate program, there's a real sense of camaraderie among graduate students. And so for me, it was the first time where I was surrounded by people who were extraordinarily passionate about philosophy and, critically thinking in all these different ways. So we would talk about the latest movie we'd seen, and then also be able to relate it to what we were studying in class. And I really enjoyed that.
Well, and I think this is one of the biggest selling points of a graduate education, is that you build a scholarly community in a very intense and very meaningful way. Because where else do we have a space for that? And in fact, many people, after we sort of graduate from that community, we kind of miss it because it's very difficult to replicate. So there is this beauty, this sense of community, this sense of we're in this together. And that's, I think, what is very, very attractive about that. Mm-hmm. Now, during coursework, you go to courses together, you're in classroom with professors, and the transition from coursework to dissertation is what is known as the comprehensive exam. And that varies from program to program and university to university.
Not all even have the comprehensive exam.
Yeah, and normally it is a sort of exam to show that you have, in fact, mastered the discipline as you're expected to by that point in time.
Let's say a little something about ours, because we had a particularly onerous comprehensive exam, which I think is very old school and not offered a lot of universities anymore, including actually where we went.
Yeah,
so
I think they changed it.
Yeah, so our comprehensive exam, so this is like the maximally intense, and we can talk about some less intense versions. Our comprehensive exam consisted of 4 48-hour exams that you took over the course of 2 weeks.
So it was like one exam 2 days, one day break,
off,
one exam for 2 days, 1 day off, so 4 times.
And there were 5 areas. There was ancient, medieval, modern, 19th century, and 20th century philosophy. You took 48-hour exams in all of the areas except your area of specialization.
Yes.
So both you and I did not take the 20th century exam because that's our area of specialization. We took the other 4.
Yeah, so you have to prove expertise in the things that you don't specialize in.
Exactly.
Yes.
And we had a 60-book reading list that we had to read all of those books, preferably take courses in as many of them as possible. And then the 48-hour exams comprised 4 essays. So we had to write 4 essays. I think they were maybe like 8 pages each or
there
something.
was no limit.
Yeah,
there was a minimum. I think 8 pages was the lower end.
Yeah.
But it meant
that was the lower end. Yeah, because I think they totaled. Usually people were writing well over 100. It was like between 150 and 200 pages, I think, were
in that week and a half.
The total, yeah.
Yeah, my comprehensive exam was close to 200 pages.
Yeah.
And we would wake up in the morning. We would, for the day of the exam, let's say the ancient exam, we would wake up that morning at 9 a.m. or at 8 a.m. The director of our program would send us the questions because we didn't have them ahead of time. So everybody's just anxiously looking at their email, like refreshing.
And there was no collaboration allowed. You had to be completely alone.
Yes. No. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And so you get the questions, and you have to write that day 2 10-page essays, essentially, minimum. Maybe
and then the
maybe
next
longer.
day, same thing.
The next day, 2 additional 10-page essays.
Yeah, or 8 or whatever.
Whatever, yeah. And so that's the exam.
And so I just want to say something quickly about that and about why that is very old school and is not offered much anymore. It's extremely psychologically grueling in a way that does not work for most people and is actually modeled on an old vision of mostly male philosophers who had wives to feed them and take care of them during this time. And so I think part of what people like us, found so difficult about this exam was to actually do these 48-hour exams and also like take care of yourself, make food, etc. And so it's also very ableist. So there are problems of accessibility with these kinds of exams. So a lot of graduate programs have moved, or history of philosophy programs have moved towards other kinds of comprehensive exams, such as term papers that go towards that, or oral exams that are much shorter. So
or even take-home essays where you don't have that compressed timeline.
Yeah.
Because you can still show expertise if they give you a week to write an essay rather than having to write 2 essays in 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And so, different programs have different ways of testing their students, but the idea is that generally there will be some kind of evaluation that will test their comprehensive knowledge of the field, hence the term comprehensive exam.
And that's what gives you the master's. After that point, and you're moving towards the dissertation phase process, you have to come up with an idea for your dissertation. And usually you have to defend that idea for your dissertation, which is called a prospectus. Once you have successfully defended your dissertation prospectus, selected your dissertation advisor, and so on, you move towards writing your dissertation, which is usually a process that's a minimum of 2 years and may, as we said before, extend quite a bit beyond that. Now, norms within the discipline of philosophy for your dissertation vary widely. So as you know, if you watch our channel or listen to our podcast, David and I have, you mentioned, a history of philosophy background, and we came out of a continental philosophy program. Their dissertations are usually, I would say, like minimum 150 pages up to, I think our department had to institute a cap of 400 or something.
Yes.
So mine was like 250, 300.
Yeah,
300 maybe.
Mine was about 250 also, 250
Yeah.
pages.
Yeah.
But I know of several programs that have had to institute, like Rutgers, for example, instituted a 700 page maximum because they had a graduate student who just kept adding rather than revising.
Yes.
So whenever they got feedback, they just like were like, I'm gonna write another 3 chapters.
Totally. But in our subfield, I would say like around 200 to 250, 300 is pretty standard.
Yeah.
In analytic philosophy programs, I was going to say departments, then I just said programs. In analytic philosophy programs, it's not uncommon to see dissertations that are 60 to 100 pages because they're often written as a few chapters that are written as articles. So they're really widely varying norms, which I think gets us to the question of what the relation of your dissertation is to publications. There are differing ideas about whether you should try and publish one or more academic articles during grad school, and also whether you should write your dissertation in such a way that's just demonstrating expertise in something and it's sort of a whole unto itself, or whether it should be written as a series of philosophy articles or as a book.
Yeah, so in our area of philosophy, continental philosophy, it's much more common that the standard and the expectation is that you will produce something that in theory looks like a book. Whether you publish it down the road or not.
Neither of us did with ours.
Neither of us did. I published a couple of chapters of mine as articles. And then I thought about publishing it as a book, but then it was too psychologically overwhelming to think about it again after I had already put several years into it. And so I just thought I'm moving on to other things, and that's great.
Yeah.
And that brings us sort of to the end of that process of educational formation that culminates in the PhD. But that final stage is that once you finish your dissertation, of course, you defend it. And there's an oral defense. All your friends and family get to show up in this room. You give a summary of your dissertation, and then your entire committee of faculty members, I mean, they grill you for about 2 hours.
Yeah.
Would you say 2 to 2.5 hours?
Yeah.
Asking you really tough questions, challenging you. And that's the moment where you are supposed to absolutely convince everybody in the room without a doubt that you are indeed doctor quality in your field, that you merit that doctorate.
I want to go back to this question of publication around your dissertation and like publishing in grad school. So I will just say from my perspective, I did exactly what I was told not to do, which is finish my dissertation, wait a few years, come back to it, realize it feels really stale to me and I no longer think many of the things that I once thought, and then basically do nothing with it. So I think I've only published one chapter of my dissertation. The other chapters have taken shape in my work in different ways, but I mean, they're totally unpublished. And I don't know, that's one way to do it, but not the way that I was advised to do it. So some people think that it's important to publish at least one article when you're in a PhD program because it helps you get a job. And, because it helps you get a job. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Other people think, especially traditionally analytic programs, like some of the more prestigious ones, that you shouldn't publish at all in graduate school because you're not yet ready to.
Yeah, so this is something that I am torn about in terms of taking a position, because there's a pragmatic side of me that tells me that one of the realities of the job market is that if people go on the job market, some of whom have publications and the other ones don't, in general, committees will look more closely at the application of the person that can show that they have published already.
Okay, yeah.
On the other hand, I do agree that publishing during your PhD is an unreasonable expectation, partly because of reasons tied to being green, but also because you don't yet know exactly what direction your career will take.
Yeah.
And so it's a question that each student has to sort of assess on their own terms.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an article that you feel really, really proud about and you're certain that you want to stand by it, then yes, it might make sense to publish.
Mm-hmm.
But my worry about this is that it's a sign of the spread and the intensification of the publish or perish mentality, the quantification of the notion of success, and this idea that the more you publish, the better you are. And now there are some graduate students that are going on the job market with a crazy amount of publications.
Totally.
And part of me wonders, like, what is going on here? How are you showing up to the market on your first year with like 10 publications? Like, I didn't even have
And
that.
how good are these articles?
Well, how good are they? But also, are you okay?
Yeah.
So I think it's a sign of a larger structural problem tied to the university.
And I have noticed quite a bit in the years since we graduated from our PhD program that graduate students have been having a harder time with work-life balance than when we were in grad school. Like, I will say, I didn't really struggle with work-life balance when we were in grad school. I felt like the environment,
Because you didn't work. You were just partying it up. I'm kidding. That's a lie. That's a lie.
Because we were... No, I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
We were making a lot of money, but we had a structure that facilitated our growth, in my opinion. I mean, just as one example, I saw some like Instagram reminder recently of maybe 10 years ago when you and I were reading in grad school at the pool together on some beautiful spring day. Like, that is a delightful memory. And we did have a lot of really, really good, fun times. We also got to go to a place that had pretty good financial support for student travel. So I got to spend 4 out of 5 summers of my graduate school experience in Europe, which is really cool. Paid for by the university. And so I was able to afford these 2-month-long trips to Europe while not making a lot of money. I got to go to Italy multiple times and have these 3-week intensive conference style workshops with other people that, helped me a lot with networking and with my philosophical growth. I got to spend 2 summers doing archival work in Normandy, which was just heaven. And so there are a lot of benefits, I think, to going to grad school in terms of the work-life balance. And I understand that this is worsening for graduate students today. That said, I think labor conditions are tough in general. So just a couple of quick other thoughts on that. One is, part of the reason that I went into academia is because I really liked the idea of being able to work from home part of the time. Nowadays, since we were in graduate school, things have changed a lot, and there are way more jobs outside of academia that allow you partial work from home. The reason that academia allows you part-time work from home is because you're not teaching all the time. Teaching is only one part of our job. Doing research is a lot of our job, and I get to do my writing at home. But nowadays, like, my friends in other industries actually have more flexibility than I do. So that's kind of one thing to weigh. And another thing to weigh, and I think you might want to get back to some of the financial stuff a bit later too, but one thing that just comes to mind now is, even though I was able to subsist off of a graduate school wage, also having a part-time job, I also wasn't saving money because you're making a very small stipend. And so if building up equity in your 20s is important to you and you don't have family wealth, graduate school is not really going to help you with that.
So so I'll say a couple of things about this issue of money, because just to make it concrete, we went to graduate school about 10 years ago, something like that.
I finished in 2016. You finished in 2015?
So 2015. I made $17,000 a year. That was my salary. And so you can imagine splitting that. 17,000. And so I was a broke student. Like Ellie, I also got these like little summer grants to go do research.
Yeah.
I don't know why I almost put like air quotes on that, to go do research in Europe.
Doing my little research.
Yes. No, I was doing research in Europe. No, and when I went to Europe, the first couple of times I made friends who would ask me, how do you, we know you're a broke student, how do you afford to do this summer vacation in Europe? And it's well, you just have to understand the economics, namely that I have a very low salary, but this is paid for by the university, so it's not a luxury that I'm giving myself. And I think that kind of salary of living, like, it's not a poverty wage, it's above it, but you're not going to be saving money. That's really important, because it means that you have to think about a good portion of your 20s as sort of, being taken out of maybe a life plan of building.
It's like in financial limbo.
Yes, you're in financial limbo, again, without the guarantee that there will be a job in the area at the end of that.
And even if there is, it's probably not going to be very high paying.
Exactly. I mean, yeah.
People don't go into academia in order to make a ton of money.
Yeah, no, the other thing I wanted to say has to do with the experience of labor conditions in these programs, because I agree with you. I also didn't experience my PhD program as unbearable or as stressful to the point that it would break me. Mm-hmm. But we had friends and colleagues and peers who had a very different experience of that. And so it depends on a lot of variables. It's about mental health. It's about your social network. It's also about sometimes bad relationships occur in academia. If you get unlucky in being the recipient of one of those. I'm being very vague, just...
Well, but yeah, I mean, like, advisor, you might have the wrong advisor for you,
Or, just also accidents. Your advisor has to leave to another university, you get left in limbo. Yeah. If you come from a low-income background, you don't have the safety net of knowing that if things get tough at the end of the month, you could ask your parents for help. Yeah. And so all of these are realities, and so we know people who dropped out of our program, some by choice, others not by choice. And so it is a difficult space, and it's difficult also just in terms of the amount of labor, because there is no clear distinction between when you're on the clock and when you're off the clock, because you're studying things that you like, so you end up sometimes overworking.
So true.
And academia is very bad at sort of valorizing that attitude of devote yourself to this life mission without material recompense. Mm-hmm. And so many of us were overworked, even those of us who maybe didn't see it that way. In some ways.
Thinking about what the day-to-day in graduate school might look like, I think you're absolutely right that there is a blurring of the lines between what's work time and what's not work time, especially when you're going out with your friends and still talking about philosophy, which is one of the fun parts of it.
Look at us, we're still working a decade later. Without getting paid.
Okay, so there are three main components to life in graduate school in terms of how you're spending your time. Reading, writing, and teaching. And when you're in coursework, there's a fourth, which is seminars, right? Like taking classes.
Yeah, I put that together with reading. Reading in the context of a class. So.
Sure. Yeah, and so if those things appeal to you, and specifically in a philosophical context, because we're talking about philosophy grad school, not grad school in general, if those things appeal to you, then this could be a really cool lifestyle. I think the advice that I got was, does that sound appealing enough to you that you could just do it for 5 to 8 years of your life and not regret it if you came out on the other side needing to look for a different career?
Job.
And for me, the answer was, of course, absolutely, yes. To get paid to study philosophy, that sounds like heaven, even if I'm not making a lot of money. And so I really enjoyed that. I think it depends a lot on people's personalities, though, because I think there are people for whom the structure of a graduate program does not play to their strengths, and some people for whom it does. I think about you a little bit, David, because you were a couple years above me in the program. you're very motivated, you're very self-motivated, and you have a very strong work ethic. And I think that was inspiring to me when I was starting out in graduate school 2 years behind you, because I saw the way that you actually were able to apply yourself to studying. Like this week I'm reading this book, then I'm writing this thing on it, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you are the kind of person who thrives from having sort of broad overarching structure, but doesn't need the day-to-day structure,
yes,
because you can create your own day-to-day structure, then this lifestyle might be for you. But if you are the kind of person for whom that is not the case, and you need more everyday structure, I would not recommend graduate school, because you might find yourself in the position of getting to the dissertation phase and just feeling totally lost.
Yeah, like, what is the term?
At
la
sea.
dérive? At sea.
Yes. And it's just a difference in personality, right?
Yeah, and there's also the psychological dimension of it, that if you thrive under that kind of external regimentation of structure, when you don't have it, you end up hating yourself, because you will blame yourself for not succeeding in this more open space. But I like what you said, and this is something that I tell my students when they ask me, hey, David, should I apply to grad school? I tell them, look, the real question here is, number one, when you're choosing between a paid and an unpaid program, you should go to one where you have to pay only under two situations. If it's not very expensive, like a master's program at a state school in state, or if you're independently wealthy and you don't care about money. Now, if you do get lucky enough to get into one of those PhD programs that will pay you, do it knowing that you won't make a lot of money, you will not save money, you will not build wealth, you may not have a job at the end of it. But if you can get to the end and look backwards without regret about leaving, it can be a truly meaningful experience.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you will regret investing 6 years, 5 years of your life into something that doesn't translate into a career, and where the statistics, go the other way, then maybe it's also not the right decision for you, because you will have to live with this psychological weight of, why did I choose this path that that didn't do justice by me at the end of it.
What if there's somebody who's not independently wealthy and has the option to go to a master's program where they must pay, but it's not cheap? And their rationale for wanting to do that is that they want to get into a PhD program, but they didn't get into PhD programs, and so they want to pay for a master's program in order to get into a paid PhD program.
So it depends on the specifics of their finances. I would say if they are low-income students, I would probably say this is too risky.
Yeah.
Or at least my intuition for myself would be that.
Because we had a professor who was in their 50s when we went to grad school who was still paying off.
Yes.
I think master's debt.
Yes, and so that's my real worry, that you're going to be carrying this this ball and chain of a financial debt for a very long time. And knowing that you might not get a job afterwards, not because of anything that you did or didn't do, but just because of the nature of the market, makes it seem unethical for me to encourage that. And so I do, in those cases, say, my sense is no, but I support you if you decide to make this decision.
Yeah.
And if it's a good student for whom I think a very strong letter of recommendation is appropriate, I will write a very strong letter of recommendation. In my case, I was a student from a low economic status. I mean, my parents would not be able to provide any kind of financial support. They provided a lot of emotional and symbolic support. But when I came to that juncture of deciding, am I going to go to grad school or not? In my case, the decision was very different. Yeah. I was graduating from undergrad. I was getting my degree, my BA. And a professor said, why don't you consider this? And my thinking process was, well, I don't have any job prospects right now. I have no idea what I'm doing once I graduate.
Yeah.
as a person of, coming from a low income background, my idea was to get a job, maybe bartending, maybe working at a coffee shop, maybe continuing to work at the bookstore where I worked throughout undergrad. And that's not a career where I'm going to build equity or wealth anyway. So for me, it's like, it was somebody might pay me to continue to read something that I like for 5 years.
Yeah.
Even if I don't get a career, that's already more fun than what is immediately in front of me.
Totally.
And so it was a very different kind of reasoning.
Yeah.
Say that if I did have a career in front of me right at the end of undergrad, or if I had valued wealth acquisition in my 20s, because I thought that was an expectation.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of middle class and upper class people, well, middle class in particular, middle class students might perceive going to a PhD as risky for this reason.
Yeah.
Because they won't be able to follow necessarily in their parents' footsteps. For me, that was never the model, so it didn't apply.
Yeah. So I'm curious too about what we might have to say about philosophy grad school versus other disciplines, because working in continental philosophy, our research has a lot of overlap with comparative literature, with English, with gender and women's studies, with area studies in, other types of area studies. And so I sometimes have students who are weighing the possibility of going to graduate school in philosophy versus in other disciplines. What are your thoughts on that?
For field choice, I do feel strongly that a student should pursue their passion. Wherever they...
What does that mean, though?
No, I mean, I think sometimes the ambiguity kicks in for students when they think about, are there more philosophy departments than women's studies departments? Or am I more likely to get a job if I am in an English department than anthropology department?
So that you think they shouldn't worry about career concerns so much?
If you're already deciding to pursue higher ed, then you should go into the area that actually draws you to it. Because if you don't have that passion for the field, then the whole thing doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
If you're going to sacrifice your passion for career advancement, then go into another place than academia, and you will be more successful and more profitable.
Yeah.
But it is true that sometimes it's a question of fit.
Yeah.
And that's the trickier one. In my case, I applied to women's studies programs. I didn't get into them.
Okay.
I applied to philosophy programs. I applied to a history of science program. I got into it. So I was choosing even between history and philosophy.
Yeah.
And at the end, I decided, well, my real passion, I think, lies in philosophy. So that's the field that I will go into.
Okay.
Yeah. It was also the one that was most viable given that I got into it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that I really value about philosophy as a discipline, and I also recognize that this is not going to be something that everybody values, is the fact that our discipline has been around for thousands of years and has an extraordinary body of knowledge, including texts, that emerge out of it. The reason I say not everybody is going to value this is that philosophy in our subfield sometimes fetishizes the canon a bit too much.
Yeah.
But I personally really valued being able to be in a discipline where so many periods of human history, areas of inquiry were open to me. And I also really value the rigor that philosophy brings. Philosophy is a no bullshit discipline.
No bullshit.
Yes.
Sometimes there's a lot of bullshit in it too.
but as a discipline, right? So there is going to be bullshit, obviously, that proliferates in philosophy for sure. But I think part of the disciplinary identity is that this is not like.
But what do you mean by bullshit?
So we want to kind of get to the bottom of things and be able to articulate what we mean in both a macro and a micro sense and defend it, right? And so I really like this idea of having to defend your claims because I was always really passionate about writing, but I also feel like I got away when I was younger with just like saying stuff and thinking it sounded deep. And then philosophy, once I got to college and started taking philosophy classes, I was like, oh my God, I thought I was a good writer, but I'm not getting very good grades in this discipline. And what I realized is that I wasn't defending my claims properly.
I see.
And so what I really like about philosophy is that it makes you do that. And I'm not saying that rigor is not a norm in other disciplines either, but I think there's something about the particularity of the rigor in philosophy, which can take many different forms that appeal to me and made me better as a thinker, a writer, a person.
Yeah, well, I think this has to do, you began by talking about the openness of philosophy, so many areas of human history, so many things to talk about. This is what sometimes gets called the objectlessness of philosophy, that we don't have a particular object that we study. So, for instance, if you're a literature person, then you study literature. That's your object. If you're an anthropologist, you study culture. In philosophy, it's really open. In fact, there might not be an object at all. And because of that, often the identity of the discipline is cultivated or forged, not at the level of the object, but at the level of method. And that gets translated into this focus on forming your discourse logically and focus on argumentation. And so, fair enough. I also enjoyed that about the field. To be honest, I have enjoyed it less and less. And I have come to see things differently, especially as I myself have moved into other disciplines. Because we're here in Pomona College in the philosophy department in Ellie's office, but I am no longer in a philosophy department, even though I am a philosopher. And so that thing that I really valued about philosophy, now I sort of contextualize it otherwise by seeing what other disciplines have to offer by foregrounding other ways of producing meaning.
And can you maybe say, can you maybe say in a quick word what you think other disciplines might have to offer that philosophy wouldn't?
Precisely the idea that there are other ways of producing meaning that don't rely on logical regimentation and necessarily the power of inference.
Okay.
And so
you don't think we can? That's already encapsulated within different forms of doing philosophy.
Yeah, but
a lot of the thinkers that we work on don't have traditional forms of logical argumentation.
Exactly, but they also get accused of not being real philosophers by the mainstream philosophers. So this is the catch-22.
I do think, though, that one of the nice things about philosophy, and this might seem quite different from what I said a moment ago, but I actually think is compatible with it, is that because the scope of philosophy is so vast, it provides for a lot of creativity. You can go in so many directions in philosophy, and I really like that about it too.
Yeah, and I do too. I mean, that's why I'm still doing philosophy, right? It's not as if I suddenly became I'm not a novelist, I'm not a playwright, I'm not an anthropologist, and I'm most definitely not a scientist. So there is something about philosophy that still has me yoked to the discipline. Even though now it's a little bit with a longer leash, because I am philosophy adjacent in many ways, even in my own work.
Do you have any additional thoughts for folks who might be considering applying to grad school?
No, just know that it can be a wonderful experience, but it just as much as it can be grueling at times, and hopefully if you go into this field, it's just with eyes wide open about what is on the other side. That's really the danger that I want to try to protect my students from, which is to get that shock at the end of the invested 6 years rather than at the beginning. Okay.
I think my final thought, actually, I feel like is really important, and I'm kind of surprised we didn't articulate it earlier, which is that to be a philosopher in contemporary American society is usually to have studied philosophy at the graduate level, at least in the way that we think about philosophers, right?
I know where you're going, I think. Maybe.
I don't even know where I'm going. That doesn't mean, however, that philosophical pursuits aren't for everyone. And so a higher education degree in philosophy can open a lot of doors, especially an undergrad degree in philosophy can open many, many doors. a master's and or PhD in philosophy is going to be an interesting feature of your resume, but you don't need it if you're not going into academia. You can pursue philosophy in many other ways without being a philosophy professor. And I do think in our society, philosopher and philosophy professor are often, they often mean the same thing, because there aren't, when you're thinking about an actual job title, there aren't a lot of avenues to make money from doing philosophy other than through academia. And that's a whole much broader conversation. But that is to say that pursuing philosophy in a hobby-like way has never been easier. I mean, this video is one example. We're sharing ideas with a broader audience that we would usually tell our students, right?
It would be limited to this office typically.
Yeah. So it's never been easier to have a philosophy hobby, and that may or may not mean pursuing philosophy in a more official way. No, not even rigorous, just official.
And one thing to add to this, because I do think it's important.
Did I go where you thought I was going?
You went in the same direction, but ending in an opposite note.
Interesting. Okay.
And I thought you were going to go in the direction of like, look, it typically means studying philosophy, and so not everybody that thinks they're doing philosophy is doing it just because they say so, because there has been sort of spread.
But that is also true.
Yes, and so you went in the other direction, which is that you can also do philosophy without being in this official
Don't trust everybody who says they're a philosopher.
Yeah, and I think the key here, and I suspect that I speak for both of us, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you want to be a philosopher and you want to philosophize, whether you're in the academy or outside of it, it takes work and it takes reading. And there is no way around that. There, like, this is something that we have struggled with even in our identities as podcasters and as YouTubers. You're not a philosopher because you watched a few or even a bunch of lectures online. You have to confront texts. You have to think about them. And that takes time and that takes effort. And unfortunately, it also takes time. So it will occasionally feel like a pressure a pressure that is in competition with the other demands on your time. And
it's a major skill that requires years of development. Reading philosophy, as you know, if you've tried it in a random context, like you can't exactly just pick up Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and link in the way that you would be able to with a novel.
Yeah, it's an acquired taste and an acquired skill. Slowly acquired. Both the skill and the taste.
Well, obviously we haven't been able to cover everything in this video, but we hope that this has been helpful if you are thinking about this, or interesting, even if you're not thinking about this, but wanted to know a little bit about why or why not somebody might be interested in going to grad school in philosophy.